Welcome to Trash Compactor. I'm Josh, still celebrating Star Wars Podcast Day 2023 with another special episode outside our regular season. Though the actual Star Wars Podcast Day was February 7th. Happy birthday again, Dad. They're celebrating the whole week, so we're doing another installment. And it's a special one because not only am I joined today by Bracey,
Hello.
I'm also thrilled to welcome a returning guest, the host of the award-winning Apple New and Noteworthy podcast, Proud Stutter, MAYA CHUPKOV. MAYA, welcome back to Trash Compactor.
Hello. Happy to be here again.
Yeah, we're really psyched to have you. Regular listeners of the show might remember MAYA from the episode we did on stuttering and media and podcasting, Trash Compactor episode 23. And in that episode, MAYA, you mentioned you were not a Star Wars fan, right?
Well, I wouldn't say I wasn't a fan. I just hadn't ever watched Star Wars. It was just always something that was over there.
No, I get it, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you did say that you were curious to get into it because I forget how you put it exactly, but like you felt like it was the kind of thing you would get into.
Yeah, I'm like a huge nerd when it comes to like fantasy and sci-fi, but sometimes it takes me a while to get really deep in the lore. And so like with Game of Thrones, it took me a while. With Lord of the Rings, I was really young when it came out and I was scared of it. And then I got into that. And so Star Wars, it was just something I never thought I'd get into. And then I watched Andor and everything changed.
You mentioned you had watched episode 1 at some point in your life.
I did, but it was very like, it was just kind of, it wasn't a very, I wasn't all there. I was kind of just like, oh, okay, it's on. Like, I'll just watch it, I guess.
No, that's not. You don't have to explain not being drawn into Star Wars from episode 1. But as someone who was like not super into Star Wars, beyond just sort of like the ambient awareness of it, what did you make of Andor?
I loved it. Like, I feel like I loved it was just such a good show. Like, even beyond Star Wars, just the characters and the message and how all these different arcs of the season connected together, but they were also like their own mini seasons too. I loved everything about it. Like when there's a good show, it's hard to not love it. So, and it was my favorite show because every year I do like a top 10 shows because I love TV. And Andor was number 1. And people's were like, what's Andor? Like, why is it your number 1? And I was just like, you're just going to have to watch it. It's so good. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I saw when you tweeted that your top 10 lists of shows, and I saw that was number 1, and that made me very happy. And as Bracey will attest to, like, one of the things about Andor that we have been discussing, like in the context of, also being Star Wars fans, I think we occupy an interesting space where, like, we are Star Wars fans, but we are also just, appreciators of film and TV in general. So what is super interesting is that, like, this is the first piece of Star Wars media, I think, possibly since the original movie or maybe Mandalorian, that like is like just on its own merits, aside from its association with a larger fandom or a larger lore, is just like fantastic top to bottom TV. It's like whether it's the writing or the story or the structure of that story or the way it's shot, like, it's just really, really good. And it kind of puts us in a weird spot because, like, one of the things that at least I struggle with is, like, the question arises, like, is it too good to be Star Wars in a weird way? I don't know. Bracey, what do you think about that?
Yeah, what I really appreciate that show is that it dares to invest in the characters, and it dares to invest and take the time to invest in the environment and the context, so you can really, over time, appreciate the bigger movements that happen in the show, which I feel like happens every 3 episodes. Like there are kind of these mini arcs that are happening that lead to the grander arc over the course of the entire show. And I just love that they dared to do that, like that because it's not what I feel like is the standard where you need some kind of fireworks, like every episode something needs to go happen, like the big bad or whatever the case may be. Like they actually take the time to be like, hey, these first few episodes, like you may not understand why you're watching this show, but you'll definitely understand by episode 6, and by episode 12, like you'll be freaking out, I'm sure. I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, out of curiosity, Maya, like, so when Andor premiered, they released the first 3 episodes, at the same time. I think probably because of what Bracey just said. And like you said, like the structure of the season was there were really these like 3 or 4 episode mini story arcs. And I think, the beginning of it was sort of a slow process of setting up the world and, moving the pieces into place. And I'm wondering, as someone who was not invested going in, how many episodes did it take for the show to really like get its hooks in you?
So I went into Andor already knowing it was getting good reviews, even from people that weren't necessarily Star Wars fans. So I went into it kind of knowing that I'd enjoy it. Like, I'm the type of TV watcher where, like, I kind of finish shows even if I'm not like in love with it. I just kind of like to finish shows. So I knew I'd at least finish it. But the moment I was introduced to B2 Emo, I think is the name.
Yeah.
I was sold. I was like, oh my God, I love this robot so much. And yeah, so after being introduced to, and I think that was really early.
Yeah.
That was the first episode.
Yeah, it's definitely in the first
I was
episode. Yeah.
sold. I was like, as long as B2 was in this show, I'm all in.
So then you must have loved, I think it was like toward the end of the season when the Fiona Shaw character has passed away, and he's all emo about it, for lack of a better word. Like so droids are a thing in Star Wars, and like, usually they use how a character treats droids as sort of a comment on like whether like this is a good character or a bad character. It's like, like if they take the time to treat a droid with a modicum of respect or like with some consideration for their quote unquote feelings. But that said, like I was shocked how affected I was by his grieving process for that character. Like one of the things that the show does so well is that they take Star Wars tropes and do like the most amazing version of it that I've ever seen, which is just like, again, it just, I mean, I guess it's not really a mystery. It's just like a really well written, well acted, well everything show. I think that's really all it comes down to.
Yeah, I had my defenses up when I first saw the droid because I've seen so many droids and so many versions by this point after seeing so many different Star Wars properties, and it getting peed on in the beginning and then shocking them. I was like, are they going for like a kind of R2-D2 kind of thing here? We're like, what's the deal? And so my defenses were up, but by I'd say like halfway through the series, I was like, oh, this character's brilliant. Like this character's like they did a really good job. Like, especially me going back and starting to watch the episodes again for the podcast. I realized that like, oh no, they're actually developing a character here, and like they're taking the time for us to care about this little droid, which is fantastic. And then it really pays off towards the end in that moment that you were talking about, Josh.
Yeah, one of the saddest moments was when one of the I forgot what it was, but like one of the enemy people like pushes B2 while what's her name was giving her speech.
Marva. Yeah.
Marva.
Yeah, the
And I
Fiona
was
show.
just like, I got so like mad at that. I was like, no, not B2. Like, yeah, that stuck with me.
You actually also you pointed this out to me, Maya, like not to make this whole conversation about this, but you mentioned that B2 had a stutter when he was on low power.
Oh, I didn't realize it was when he was on low power. I thought it was just all the time.
Maybe it was all the time. I'm not sure. But one of the striking things about Andor, and that you also mentioned this too, Maya, was the way that it renders this world and this conflict. Like there are so many different threads, like so many different stories going on that each depict different parts of a larger struggle. And like, Maya, I know that you're interested in political action and building movements. And I think this show was really striking in how, usually in something like Star Wars, where it's like ostensibly a fight against a tyrannic empire or whatever, they really focus on the like handful of larger than life heroes at the center of the action. And like, what these individuals do will determine the fate of the galaxy or whatever. But what is so, I think, refreshing about Andor is that it uses that same sci-fi fantasy setting and that same conflict, but it's really multifaceted in how it depicts all the different components and concerns and figures that make a movement. And Maya, I don't know like your sort of ambient familiarity with like Star Wars as like a cultural object, but like it's like about heroes and good guys and bad guys, and like it's really about the individual story against like the backdrop of the larger story, and sort of everything kind of revolves around what they do. And I just thought that this show really gave you the bird's eye view, or like a more like global view of what was going on sort of at every level, like whether it was like the real dyed-in-the-wool revolutionaries or the politicians who have to follow certain decorum, or the people like Andor who are just like, I mean, at the beginning of the show when we meet him, like I don't think he really gives a shit about fighting for freedom or fighting for principle. I think he's just, trying to get through his day. And I think that's one of the really fascinating things about the show is that like the guy at the center, he's not, and I don't mean this in like a negative sense, but like he's not special. He's just a guy.
Yeah.
And well, I guess like what do you think of Cassian as a character?
Yeah, I loved just like his transformation of like him just doing things just so he could survive, and like took things, it seemed like, day by day, and he had his like core people that he like loved and was trying to protect, and that's it. Like he didn't care about this like larger purpose. Like he only saw that. And then I think by the end, there's all these like little pieces that just add up, and like one of them in particular is the is Nemec's manifesto, and like how that kind of ends up being, because I how I watched Andor is I would listen to like a recap of it afterwards, where they kind of connect it to like other Star Wars things, so I could kind of learn
Oh,
about the
interesting.
world as I went. And so I know this manifesto ends up being like the manifesto for the revolution, is it called, or the revolt? I don't know.
The rebellion or the
The
rebel alliance?
rebellion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it was really cool to just kind of see how all these things added up to where at the end it was like, like he wasn't able to like protect Marva, for example. And so he really took what she said to heart about joining the rebellion and then him joining it. And so, yeah, and they definitely spoiled a lot of stuff for me, just stuff that happens in the future, but I don't mind that because this is supposed to be an additive thing where you already know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, totally. Like I find that to be very interesting, because I watch shows in a similar way, like especially when it's something that has kind of an established lore. Sometimes I want to watch the thing so I can read about the thing.
I had a question on that because I was curious, like, when you were watching the episode, did you feel like you needed more context or that you were missing out, or did you generally you felt pretty solid?
Yeah. I didn't really mind that I didn't know. Like, I felt like I wasn't missing anything while I was watching Andor. And what was great about these well, there's one in the Ringer podcast. Oh my God, I'm obsessed with them. Oh my God. So they helped me just kind of recap the episode, and then they would like also talk about things that happened in other Star Wars. And so I felt like I was connecting the dots I was going, and it just made me like I think it would have been just as enjoyable if I didn't have the recaps, but it just added another layer of like, oh my gosh, like it was kind of like seeing it in a new light after watching it the first time.
That's awesome. By the end, like the post-credit scene, they have like this big reveal. Did that mean anything to you when you watched it? Like, did it feel like a bump? They were showing that the thing that they had been working on in the prison camp was actually part of this satellite array.
I didn't see that.
I really that. Then there's a post-credit scene, and I recommend you go check it out. I'm curious to hear what you think about that.
What? How did I not know about this?
I don't know.
So that actually is very interesting, and I don't think it matters if you see it or not. I think like that's the most directly connected to the rest of Star Wars mythos, which is why it's like a post-credit scene, because it's not at all integral to understanding anything you have just seen. So from listening to the Ringer recaps, like you probably know that this whole series is kind of a spin-off of a spin-off. It's like from Rogue One, this movie that came out in 2016, that ends like 30 seconds before the original Star Wars from 1977. And this series is sort of a prequel to that. So it's actually, now that I'm saying it, it's like a really unusual way to tell a story. It's like a prequel to a prequel to, and none of them were the Star Wars prequels. These two prequels that we're talking about.
And before that, it's like that's
yeah. No, but I'm wondering if you have thought about watching Rogue One, or if you're going to wait until the second season of Andor is done.
Yeah, I keep going back and forth about that. I'm not very compelled to watch Rogue One right now. Not that I don't want to, I just don't have that like urge yet. But what was helpful, one of the things that stuck out to me in the recap was learning that Caspian does eventually die because of something around he was like trying to do something for the rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
And we're introduced to him as like very like jaded and like really like not jaded, but just like very rough around the edges, I guess. And so that was really interesting to kind of think of him in the future, like after like years of being in this rebellion. I'm sure it's like weighs a lot on you. But yes, but I think because I'm a big Pedro Pascal fan, who I've been watching The Last of Us, and so that is making me want to watch Mandalorian now. So that might be my next Star Wars venture.
No, yeah, I would. I mean, I think Mandalorian, like its tone and its vibe, I think is much closer to what most of Star Wars is like. Would you agree with that, Bracey?
Yeah, it's more of a spaghetti western kind of feeling meets Star Wars universe, I feel.
Yeah, but it's just like it's a little more what's the word? It's like
It's closer to the original Star Wars vibe by far
yes.
than
Right,
than
yeah.
Andor. Yeah, by far.
So yeah, I mean, I would hold off on watching Rogue One if you don't have a burning desire to go out and watch it immediately, because I mean, like you kind of intuited, like it really doesn't matter whether you know what happens later or not. Like, so basically how it's going to work is, unfortunately, there's only going to be one more season of Andor, and that, from everything that the creators have said, will lead like right into Rogue One the movie, which leads right into the original Star Wars. So if you're game, I would love for this to be kind of a long-term project where we check in with you,
Yeah.
and we get your point of view as someone who, again, has no real investment in Star Wars that exists already. Because like, I mean, again, like I love Andor so much that it's really great that someone that is not already invested in Star Wars like feels the same about this show, because it just like, I think it just speaks for itself.
Yeah, and it made me tap into like other things that I wasn't planning on watching. Like after I watched Andor, or like as I was watching Andor, I was like, "Oh, I need to watch Rings of Power and I need to watch um the Game of Thrones, House of
Thrones, right? Yeah, House
Dragons."
of the Dragon. Yeah.
And now I'm reading the Lord of the Rings books, which I never thought I'd ever read. And so I'm like, Andor really made me like want to just like go nerd out on like fantasy and sci-fi stuff. And I think also just listening to The Ringer really helps you. Like you're watching the show on your own, and then you have these friends who are like helping you through like the lore and like stuff you may not know. Like the Last of Us is a perfect example. Never saw I never played the game, but I'm able to watch the show without having that. And then they have folks that have played the game kind of talk about that. So it's great just sinking your teeth into these worlds, I guess, in that way.
What do you think that is? Because I have that same, desire, like for context and for learning about stuff. Like, what do you think that is? Like, it kind of strikes me that this is a way of watching TV that I think is relatively new. Like, I don't really know of any other TV shows in history where it's like, okay, you watch it and then you immediately like go to some other group of commentators to like learn how it connects to larger lore or something. I mean, it's a whole new way of like engaging with media, right?
It feels like what they were trying to push when transmedia was like a big it was like the buzzword for television.
I've been thinking about that for weeks. Like, it's like, transmedia was like a big thing like 10 years ago.
Yeah, but it couldn't grow. Like it couldn't they were trying to force it somehow, and it never happened, and it sounds like it just organically grew into that.
Yeah. So, Maya, I don't know if you ever heard of the term transmedia storytelling, but like a decade ago, it was like the next big thing. It was like a buzzword. It's essentially like the story happens in many different mediums and they all kind of inform and like feed each other. So like you would make a show, but it would also be a video game, and what happened in the video game would matter to what happens in the show, and then what happens in the show would also be in a series of novels or comics, and it would all sort of like all tie together. But with that, it was like trying to create it from zero. See, it seems like it's happening organically now, where it's like these things exist already. We're doing this thing, and it just so happens to connect with all these other things. It seems like that's what's going on. No, but yeah, I've been thinking of transmedia for like the last month or so, especially because transmedia, the term, has very different connotations, I think, now than it did even a decade ago.
Yeah, we're dating ourselves with that term now.
No, I know. It's just like, how could you even say the term transmedia and not think that it had something to do with like media created by trans people? Right?
Yeah, I think never hearing that, but that concept before. I feel like it failed because I think with people, with people consuming content, they like to be in control. And so like someone might be really into TV shows, but not into reading, and they don't want to feel bad for like not consuming everything. Like for me, I will never play Last of Us. Not that I'm against video games, I just know it will consume my life and I just don't have time. So it's nice to be able to like still consume media and then having this other podcast just like fill it in for me without having to make that big investment, if that makes sense.
Totally.
No, completely. No, and I think that also, it kind of has to do with this other thing I find really fascinating, or I guess ironic maybe, is that Tony Gilroy, the creator, showrunner of Andor, he similarly was not at all invested in Star Wars or like the Star Wars mythology. And he only really got excited about it when he realized the potential to tell a really unique and interesting story about revolution without having to worry about the connotation that it would have by having it happen in the real world. It's like, that's the reason the show is so good, because I think he was like, no, like there's a story that I care about that I want to tell, not for the sake of Star Wars. It's like, here's an opportunity to do something that I think, is something I can really sink my teeth into and gets me excited, that just so happens to have an opportunity to be told in this fictional context.
Kind of on that note, we had a little bit of a back and forth on our first Andor a podcast about the character of Cassian when you're first introduced in the very first kind of kerfluffle that he gets into. I'm very curious, what is your take on the introduction to that character? How do you feel that he falls on the moral spectrum when you're first introduced?
Yeah, what I really liked about this show is like it's very clear, like yeah, my first introduction to Cassian was that he wasn't a good guy. But I really liked how the show really they don't really have clear cut like you're a villain, you're a hero. Like even Luthen, who's like this person that's supposed to be, for this greater purpose to overthrow this evil empire, he had some very villain vibes sometimes. And then I think even with like the guy in the prison that we meet, like when we first meet him, what's his name? The head of
Kino Loy.
Yeah, like he gives off very villain vibes at first, and then he ends up being like the friend and like helping everyone escape. So I loved how Andor was so like they really showed that no one is really purely evil or purely good. It's like we all have some bad and good in us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of expand on that, I think what I got out of the show was that a lot of what we do in response to like the larger institutional systems that we are embedded in. So if like, circumstances are such that in order to save myself, like I have to shoot a security guard in cold blood, or like if I'm Luthen, where like, he has that phenomenal speech or soliloquy, if you want to call it that, where he's like, what have I sacrificed? Peace of mind, like, joy, happiness. It's like, all that stuff. Like he realized that someone has to do something about this horrible empire that is, choking the galaxy. And he was like, well, in order to do that, he has to do some really bad things. And it is really interesting. Like with a character like Luthen, doing these things, I think, takes a toll on him that he recognizes. Whereas a character like, oh gosh, I'm blanking on his name. the overzealous security guy at the beginning who has to go home to his mommy.
Cyril?
Cyril, yeah. Whereas Cyril, like he's subject to the same forces, and he's operating, he's doing what's in his interest. But like it's like I feel like Cyril, while he has aspects about him that you might have some sympathy for, it's like I can't help but feel like he's just not a good dude. like so it's interesting. Like you're right. The show blurs the lines, or it's like at least saying that things aren't so clear cut. But I think it is saying it's in response to the systems of power that exist. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like, we have like a window, like we see like the political stuff, we see like the shady stuff, we see like the underworld stuff, and then we see like, I don't know.
I think ultimately that's what to me makes the show so fantastic, is that it is trying to expose that it is about the systems at play. It is not about a good and bad, like that. What is like real evil exists in the systems, not in the people. Even if it is some real evil characters that have like built the system, but like the way that the system is really the evil is really pervasive in this galaxy is that this system is perpetuating the exploitation of everything. It's just exploiting planets, creatures, humans, aliens, resources, everything.
Yeah, and like the Dedra Miro character, for example, like the ISB agent, like in those scenes where like she's in the Empire's like Secret Service or whatever, it's like you find yourself kind of rooting for her because like she seems like she's, at least I think she's like the lone woman who's on that inner circle or whatever, and like there's this pervading sense of workplace sexism there, and you're like really rooting for her, and then you realize, wait a second, like she's fucking evil. I mean, she's really a terrible, terrible person. And it's so interesting. Like, if the Empire wasn't running things, what would she be doing? Who would she be?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I also love that like how they are showing the sexism, the oppression within the systems of oppression, because there are so many layers to it. And also, I think it's fantastic that her foil in the Empire is a black man. So it's this woman and this black man that are going fighting each other for just like to be one up, but in total they are both answering to a white man in a system that is like, and there's these subtle little things that I feel like they're putting in there that like, or it's just I think it's very poetic and really well crafted. And I just really appreciate these little things that if you don't know to look for it, it's just going to go right by you. But if you're paying attention, there's some messages hidden in these small choices that they.
I'm curious, Maya, what's the storyline that intrigues you the most, or that you're most invested in?
If I had to pick one, I would say Mon Mothma, just because, like, I know eventually what happens, I think, to her, like, on a very, like, not a detailed, but I know that she ends up being one of the leaders of the, but yeah, I'm just curious how she continues to navigate her very sketchy place in all of this, like, risky place in all of this. She's in with her husband and what happens with her daughter and all that. I'm just really excited for that.
No, totally. Like that stuff I thought was like really like, I mean, really what it boils down to, her storyline is like trying to maintain a public persona that everything is above board, and then behind the scenes she's really like the money person.
Yeah.
Which I just find so fascinating, that like that's an aspect of, movements and revolution that usually not really dramatized. It's usually kind of skipped over. I guess seems like one of the less flashy, least sexy things to depict in terms of drama. But like usually in a show like this where there are like multiple story threads, like there's one or two where I'm like, when it shows up, it's like, okay, well, that's when like I get up to refill my drink, or like I get up and go to the bathroom or something, and I'm like, oh, okay, like back to this. But like this show is the rare exception where like every time we cut to another character or another storyline, like I was just as invested as the rest of the stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about this, like I can't wait to see what's gonna happen. And Mon Mothma's really surprised me, like how they were able to make the like very delicate dance that she's doing just as dramatic as all of the like heist, blowing up, prison break, fireworks stuff. Like I was like, like especially in the last or second to last episode of the season where like she realizes what the cost is going to be for her. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, whoa, dude, like that was some real edge of your seat stuff. And I was like, really, I mean, again, it just comes down to phenomenal writing, phenomenal performances. It's just like, it's just so good. It's just,
It was the part of the Star Wars universe I didn't think I was interested. Like as a lifelong fan, it wasn't something I ever thought I'd be interested in. And if you wrote that like a summary on paper and showed it to me and be like, "Would you watch this show?" I'd be like, "No, it's all right." But like actually having seen it, I'm like, you could watch like they could make a whole show just on that aspect of the universe as long as they treat it with the same care and development that they had. And I'm in it. I'm there for it. I want to see the whole thing. West Wing in Star Wars. That's fantastic. That's a sign me up.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have probably watched Andor if it wasn't for Josh. So thank you, Josh.
oh, well, I mean, I thank them for making this amazing show, but um no, I was so happy when I saw you tweeted out your top 10 list of shows for 2022 and Andor was at the top. I was like, yes, I she watched
I
it and
did
she
it.
liked it. That's good. So Maya, will you rejoin us for season 2 and share your thoughts on where the show goes?
I would love to. I'm probably going to be watching Mandalorian though in between. So,
Okay,
yeah.
well then, let me know if you want to come on and talk about that, because I would love to hear what you think of Mandalorian and what the impression you have of Star Wars after watching Andor and then Mandalorian. I'd be
Yeah, I'm
super
very curious about the
curious.
contrast. How you feel about the contrast between those shows?
Okay, cool.
Well, just also really quickly, like, so you sort of watched episode 1 at some point in your life, right?
Yeah, it was like the oldest one. Yeah, episode no. It was episode 1.
So just out of curiosity, like, does it compute for you that like that movie and this show are in the same? Yeah,
I
for
am like,
our
"What
listeners,
the
she's shaking
hell?"
her head.
I'm like, "Wait, what? This is the same IP?"
Yeah, it's like it's very different. Yeah, so that said, like I think, Mando is closer to the general vibe of what most Star Wars is, as we said. But I mean, that said, I mean, that's also a very good show. Would love to have you back on if you are amenable. But Maya, where can people find you and your amazing podcast, Proud Stutter?
So you can find me on all the podcast listening apps. Just type in Proud Stutter. I'm also at proudstutter.com. That's where you can find like everything. I'm on social media, TikTok a little here and there.
Well, thank you, Maya, for joining us on Trash Compactor to talk Star Wars. Not the beat you cover, but I'm glad that
I love
you
it.
are.
I loved nerding out with you guys because no one else I can do this with. So it's just so fun.
Well, we will definitely have you back. But thanks for listening, and happy Star Wars Podcast Day, or Podcast Week, as it were. And please do check out Maya's wonderful podcast, Proud Stutter. And transcripts of this episode and all of the other Trash Compactor episodes are available at trashcompod.com. And we are TrashCompod across all social media. Thank you again to Bracey and Maya for joining us today. And we will see you on the next one.